Welcome to my presentation titled Adapting the MLAT-ES into Catalan, when young learners' age is not just any other variable. Now, young learners' language aptitude is understudied due to a lack of tests covering this period of life. Young learners, in contrast with adults, are still acquiring their L1. Consequently, a language-dependent aptitude test should be carefully designed for it to be valid. An additional challenge is found when the young learners who are to take the test are bilingual, as is the case of the bilingual Catalan and Spanish community in Catalonia. This presentation, therefore, aims at explaining the process to translate and adapt the Modern Language Aptitude Test elementary in Spanish into Catalan, so as to obtain a valid aptitude measure across grades. The results show that despite the linguistic proximity between Catalan and Spanish, several issues had to be considered, not only linguistic and cultural, but also the learner's age range the test is addressed to. So let's see this. Foreign language aptitude has been defined as an individual's initial state of readiness and capacity for learning a foreign language, and probable facility in doing so given the presence of motivation and opportunity. Traditionally, it's been measured by the MLAT, validated in 1959. This was addressed to the lessons in adults, so later on an elementary version was created for grades 3 to 6. The age range was expanded for the Spanish version, which also covered grade 7. However, today, there is no aptitude test that is totally language neutral, as even the Llama test, which is probably the most popular one nowadays, uses alphabetic symbols, which necessarily puts it in a different position for speakers of agglutinative or logographic languages. Things could get even more complicated in bilingual contexts, as researchers might wonder in which language they should administer the aptitude test, if language dependent, that is. The choice might be grounded on two factors, language dominance and language distance. Full L1 mastery would ensure reliable and valid performance in a language-dependent aptitude test. Also, the language of preference could also be asked so as to make sure that test takers feel at ease when taking the aptitude test. But what happens when test takers are bilingual? They are not asked which preference they have before taking a language aptitude test, and on top of that, they are young learners and therefore may not have fully mastered their L1s. This is precisely the aim of this paper, to see the challenges faced by young learners aged 8 to 14 who were Catalan and Spanish bilinguals when answering the MLAT-EC, that is to say, the Catalan version of the MLAT-E. This test was translated and adapted from the Spanish adaptation, trying to follow the original as much as possible. One might think that as Catalan and Spanish are closely related languages, this task would be easy. However, it was not fully so. The research questions of this paper are: what type of challenges were faced when adapting the MLAT-EC from the MLAT-ES? And also, question number 2, were the effects of these challenges the same across ages? This study stems from a larger study with 629 participants who took both the MLAT-ES and the MLAT-EC in a counterbalanced order. For this study, we will be focusing on those who took the MLAT-EC in the first place and whose performance, therefore, was used for validating the test in Catalan. This means we have a total of 304 participants distributed in similar numbers across grades. Regarding language preference, half of them expressed to prefer Catalan over Spanish, 87 expressed the preference in the opposite direction, and the remaining 70 self-reported to have no preference for one over the other. Before these results and the abstaining influence of language preference as shown in Suárez and Stansfield 223, we decided to consider them as only one group. These are the parts that both the MLAT-ES and EC consist of and the constructs they are supposed to measure. In part 1, testees have to guess the word hidden and relate it to its meaning. The challenges posed during the adaptation were mainly the relatively more simple spelling in Catalan and some differences in sound symbol associations, such as the ones in G or S, besides the fact that Times New Roman L read as capital I or number 1 for younger testees. The challenge in part 2, besides cultural issues such as certain uncommon proper nouns such as perla or laila, confusing for younger testees mostly, was the fact that both for possessives and past tenses, Catalan uses compound forms, while only one word is necessary in Spanish. If the one-word alternative had been kept in Catalan, the translation would have sounded either old-fashioned or with too high a register. Part 3 was the most challenging one, as standard Spanish only counts with 5 vowel phonemes, while Catalan has 8, besides more consonantic sounds than in Spanish, and are either non-existent or written with different spelling. That rendered this part inevitably more difficult than its Spanish counterpart, despite the challenges that the ceseo and ceseo phenomena in Spanish also posed. The items in part 4 were kept as in the MLAT-ES, although the recording was remade in Catalan. This decision was taken because no test-retest effect was foreseen if the participants were going to take the test in the other language 4 months after the first time, and because the similarities between the invented numbers in Spanish and Catalan had different targets. For example, 20 resembles 20 in Spanish, but not so much Catalan 20, which instead shares the same starting syllable as vinca. It was concluded that the MLAT-ES and the MLAT-EC were equivalent, as all items were inspected for content validity, difficulty, and reliability, rendering similar results. RQ2 aimed at examining the influence that cognitive development could have when answering this aptitude test. Significant differences were found in grade 3 and somewhat in grade 4, which reflected on the number of items left unanswered and therefore the longer time they took to answer the first items in the test, as well as the fact that some graphemes in Times New Roman were confusing for the lower grades. Besides, certain items, including specialized terms such as angle, posed an extra degree of difficulty for these participants. Testees from grade 5 on benefited from their language classes, as some of them could guess what they were being asked explicitly in part 2, relying on that knowledge of syntax to identify grammatical functions, subject, verb, direct object, etc. Only specific items with not a common word order were challenging for older participants. Finally, Part 4 presented the same challenges and types of confusion in the MLAT-ES than in the MLAT-EC across grades. To conclude, Catalan and Spanish are certainly close Romance languages, but that doesn't mean that a light translation of the MLAT-ES into Catalan could guarantee a perfect fit in a minoritarian language. That's because phonetics and spelling were a challenge for parts 1 and 3, as Catalan doesn't offer the almost perfect one-to-one correspondence of grapheme and phoneme as it happens in Spanish. Also, the fact that certain translations implied the use of words that were not cognates but that came from other linguistic roots meant changing items completely. These slight changes did not prevent the MLAT-EC from being slightly more difficult than the MLAT-ES, though not significantly so across ages. Some patterns are also to be observed across grades, with the MLAT-EC being significantly more challenging for participants in grade 3 than in those in grade 4, especially in specific items. This difficulty is due to two main factors: the learner's cognitive developmental stages, with 3 graders being in impasse between the pre-operational and the complete operational stages, and still mastering their literacy skills and vocabulary on the other hand. While the validity and reliability of both the MLAT-ES and the MLAT-EC have been proven in Catalan and Spanish population across ages, the MLAT-EC solves some specific linguistic and cultural problematic items in the MLAT-ES, especially for grade 3. Also, it doesn't show to be affected by the participant's language preference despite their bilingual status, so it can be concluded that it is an instrument that covers the gap of a lack of an aptitude test in a minoritarian language as is Catalan. Thank you for listening.